He shouldn't have been there. A weathered German shepherd pushed through knee-deep snow, his limp slowing him only slightly as he clamped a torn, blood-streaked epaulette between his teeth. No collar. No name tag. Only purpose. He came from the forgotten forest surrounding Oakridge, a solitary figure carrying a memory that refused to fade. Hours later, rescuers would pull 3 Marines from a basement, barely alive. Nobody could explain how he'd known where to find them. But this was no coincidence. This was Providence wrapped in fur, a rescue written by something greater. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe God sends angels in unexpected forms, hit that subscribe button, and type amen if you know a dog's love can change everything. Oakridge, Oregon, slept under a blanket of relentless snow that fell slow but sure, silencing the morning hum of the small mountain town. The tall pines bowed beneath the white weight, their boughs groaning in quiet surrender. On the edge of town, the streets were empty, no engines, no footsteps, only the caw of a lone crow cutting through the hush. Beyond the final power line, where asphalt turned to gravel and gravel into frozen earth, an old lumber warehouse slumped like a forgotten giant. 3 stories tall, built of brick and rusted iron, it once fueled the logging industry that had sustained Oakridge decades ago. Now its windows were boarded, fences collapsed, and the wind sighed through its hollow frame like a dirge. Through that wind came a single shape, low and steady, a German shepherd, older now, his once vibrant coat dulled by grime and frost. He favored his right leg, leaving a faint drag mark in the snow behind him. This was Ghost, formerly K9 Unit RG-18, once trained for mountain rescues and disaster response. Now, he lived up to his name in more ways than one. He was nearing 10, muzzle graying, one ear notched from shrapnel, a thin scar cutting across his haunch. His amber eyes carried a depth that only loss could forge. He hadn't been called "good boy" in nearly 2 years. Ghost had not always wandered alone. His handler, Officer Sarah Danning, had been tall, wiry, with a dry humor that hid a fierce heart. Her sharp cheekbones and dark eyes gave her a soldier's composure, but around dogs, her face softened, almost tender. She'd grown up in foster homes, joined the force young, and believed that loyalty was the purest duty. 2 winters ago, during a hostage standoff, a gas leak ignited inside a residential block. Sarah had stayed behind to rescue a trapped child. She succeeded, but the roof collapsed as she went back for her team. Ghost, restrained outside by protocol, howled until his throat was raw. He never stopped until the rescue tape went up. The silence that followed broke something inside him that never healed. Since that day, Ghost had roamed the outskirts of Oakridge, surviving on scraps and instinct. Most people forgot he existed. But that morning, as snow whispered against the old warehouse, something caught his attention, a faint, rhythmic sound. Not wind. Not wildlife. A sound no animal should make. A whimper. Ghost froze, ears pricked, his breath fogging the frigid air. He sniffed, the scent slicing sharp and metallic through his nostrils, sweat, iron, and blood. He followed it. Circling the warehouse, he pressed his nose against the vents, broken doors, and finally a narrow basement window half buried under snowdrift. Frost glazed the glass. Inside, a weak bulb flickered, and in that thin glow sat 3 men tied to separate chairs. Even through the icy pane, Ghost smelled the rot, stale sweat, dried blood, damp cloth. One of the men stirred, releasing a low, pained groan. The scent hit Ghost hard. Pain. Fear. Human. But not just any humans, soldiers. The first was Sergeant Chase Whitmore, 33, lean, square-jawed, with dark eyes that had seen too much. He was known among his men for his calm under pressure and the dry humor that masked his nightmares. To his left was Ray's Salter, a thick-set man in his mid-30s with tattooed arms and a nose that had been broken one too many times. The youngest was Lance Corporal Mason Doyle, barely 24, his leg bound with a bloody tourniquet. They had been reported missing 3 days earlier after a routine training exercise in the mountains. Ghost pawed softly at the glass, claws scratching faintly. Inside, Chase flinched. "What, who's there?" His voice cracked, brittle from thirst. Ghost didn't bark. He pawed again, scraping. Rays stirred. "You hear that? An animal?" Mason's weak voice barely lifted above a whisper. "No," Chase muttered. That sounds like a dog." Ghost's ears flicked. The window was too small, the walls too thick. But he'd found them. That was enough, for now. He turned, disappearing back into the falling snow. Miles away, a woman stood behind a peeling teal building with a crooked sign that read Oak Hollow Veterinary Clinic. Snow crusted the faded letters, icicles hung like old scars from the awning. She wore patched jeans, a heavy flannel coat, and boots dusted white. A bowl of warmed kibble steamed in her hands. Her name was Dr. Summer Kalen, 38, auburn hair tucked into a knit hat, her skin pale and freckled from long Oregon winters. Once, she'd served on a military base as a veterinarian, patching up bomb-sniffing dogs and injured K-9s returning from deployment. Her touch was calm, her voice low, the kind that animals trusted instantly. But after Sarah Danning's death, Summer had resigned, unable to face the empty kennels left behind. She'd come home, opened this small clinic, and tried to bury her grief in work. That morning, she whistled softly. "Come on, soldier. Breakfast's ready." The trees at the edge of her lot trembled, and from their shadow limped Ghost, slower than before, head low, eyes locked on her. Summer froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen Ghost in over a year. "You look rough, old boy," she murmured, kneeling low so as not to startle him. But Ghost didn't go for the food. Instead, he stepped forward and dropped something into the snow at her feet, the blood-stained epaulette. Summer stared, confusion twisting into alarm. She picked it up carefully. The patch was military issue, the Golden Globe and anchor of the U.S. Marines. The blood along its edge was fresh. When she looked up, Ghost was already fading into the snow, his paw prints swallowed by the storm. Summer gripped the patch in her gloved hand. She didn't understand how or why, but she knew one thing: Ghost had come for a reason. And she intended to find out what it was. The morning light struggled to break through the gray veil of snow clouds hanging low over Oakridge. The town lay hushed beneath its frozen canopy, the stillness thick enough to hear your own breath. Snow crusted the rooftops, collecting in soft ridges against every window ledge and fence post. Inside Oak Hollow Veterinary Clinic, warmth pressed against the cold like a fragile shield. The air smelled of disinfectant, fur, and faint lavender. Dr. Summer Kalen stood at her stainless steel exam table, a blue microfiber towel spread across it. Resting on the towel was the shoulder epaulette Ghost had delivered. It was still damp, rimmed with dried blood and dirt. She had gently scrubbed away most of the grime, revealing the embroidered insignia, the proud eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It was torn at the edges, but the blood was recent, not the kind that had spent days in the snow. Summer stared at it for a long time, her reflection blurred in the polished metal. How could this end up in the mouth of a stray dog? Especially that dog. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. "Leo, it's Summer. You need to come to the clinic. Right now." Sheriff Leo Haskins wasn't a man who rushed. But when he heard the tone in her voice, he didn't waste a second. At 61, Leo carried the weather of the mountains in his bones, broad-shouldered, with a silver beard and a voice that rumbled like gravel in a tin pail. His knees ached with the cold, and his furrowed brows gave him a constant look of mild irritation, though few men in Oakridge commanded as much quiet respect. He arrived in his old, boxy Ford Expedition, its county emblem faded to a ghost of gold on the door. When he stepped into the clinic, snow melted slowly on his heavy jacket, leaving small puddles on the linoleum. Summer met him at the counter and handed him the epaulette sealed inside a clear evidence sleeve. "A dog brought this to me last night," she said, her voice low. "A German shepherd. I'm almost certain it was Ghost." Leo turned the sleeve over in his hands, his eyes narrowing behind wireframe glasses. He read the faint lettering along the inner seam, the tag stitched with a name. "This chases size," he muttered, his voice almost to himself. "You recognize it?" Summer asked. Leo nodded slowly. "This belonged to Sergeant Chase Whitmore. His team's been missing since last week. Last radio contact was near the eastern ridge during a training drill. No sign of them. None. No bodies. No signal. Nothing." Summer exhaled, staring at the patch. "Then Ghost wasn't wandering aimlessly. He's trying to tell us something." Leo's expression hardened. "Sarah Danning's dog," he said quietly. "He's still alive." "Yes. And he dropped this at my feet like it mattered." Leo didn't hesitate. "Then we're not wasting time." The sheriff's department was small, a two-room station that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and winter boots. Maps lined the walls, marked with colored pins and faded photos from old search and rescue cases. The operations table, cluttered with notebooks and radio headsets, became the center of attention as soon as Leo returned. Deputy Margot Ellis, the youngest member of the force, leaned over a glowing monitor. At 26, she had sharp eyes behind her glasses and an energy that made caffeine redundant. Her curly dark hair was tied back, and her badge hung slightly crooked from her hoodie. She turned as Leo entered. "Sheriff, I pulled the security cam footage from the train depot near Old Ridge Crossing, just like you asked." "Show me." Margot typed fast, pulling up a grainy video feed. "Timestamped 3 days ago, 4:23 a.m., southeast corner camera." The footage flickered, and then, there he was. A German shepherd, limping across the frozen lot, snow swirling around him. In his jaws hung a rectangular, dark object. Leo leaned closer. "Freeze it." The image sharpened. The edges of the object caught the light, fabric, insignia, torn threads. Behind Leo, Summer whispered, "That's him. Ghost." Leo nodded once. "And that's the same patch." Margot looked between them, brow raised. "We're following a stray dog now." Leo's tone didn't shift. "That dog's got more search and rescue experience than half this county." Summer added quietly, "If he's coming back to the same place, he's trying to lead us. He was trained for this." Leo set his jaw. "Then we follow his lead." That afternoon, the wind picked up again, rattling the eaves of the clinic. Snowflakes spun like ghosts in the fading light as Summer stood behind the back fence. She set down a dish of food, this time with something new. She pulled a torn strip of flannel from a storage box, a piece of Chase Whitmore's old uniform shirt that had been left behind after a base repair visit months earlier. She rubbed lavender oil into the cloth, a scent Ghost had known from his training days, and tucked it beneath a log near the fence. Inside, the clinic felt hollow. The ticking of the wall clock echoed as Summer sifted through old files until she found a worn photo, Ghost beside Officer Sarah Danning, both framed by a wildfire's orange haze. Sarah's smile was reluctant but proud. Summer stared at it for a long time, her throat tightening. She remembered the deployments, the smell of smoke, the barked commands, the way Ghost had once pulled a terrified child from burning rubble. She remembered the day Sarah's flag-draped body came home alone. A knock broke her thoughts. Margot stood at the door, snow melting from her boots. "Sheriff wants us to start mapping out the lumberyard area," she said. "It's been abandoned for decades, but he thinks that's where Ghost might be heading." Summer nodded. "I'll help." Margot tilted her head. "You sure? Could get rough out there." "I've seen rough," Summer replied softly. But I also know when a dog comes back with a message, you listen. That evening, the snowfall slowed to a hush. The world turned silver under the moon's pale glow. Then, movement. Ghost emerged from the tree lean again, limping slightly but with purpose in every step. His breath steamed, and his fur shimmered faintly under the porch light. Summer waited by the fence, kneeling low. She didn't speak at first. Ghost sniffed the air, caught the familiar scent of lavender, and stepped closer. His eyes met hers, not pleading, not fearful, but urgent. Summer whispered, "You found them, didn't you?" Ghost turned, hesitated for a heartbeat, then padded back toward the forest. Without another thought, Summer grabbed her coat and followed him into the night. The forest wind cut through the trees like whispers of warning. The old lumberyard loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of steel and shadow. The building's ribs groaned in the cold, and the scent of rust and rot filled the air. Down below, in the warehouse basement, a single flickering bulb swung from its wire, throwing jittering light across the walls. The floor was slick with condensation, the air sharp and biting. Sergeant Chase Whitmore stirred, a hoarse groan escaping him. His wrists were raw from rope burns, his ribs screamed with every breath. Ray Salter, broad and battered, leaned heavily against his restraints, his face gray with exhaustion. Mason Doyle, pale and trembling, shivered violently despite the filthy blanket draped over his shoulders. Then, a sound. Scraping. Not a rat. Not the wind. Metal against concrete. Chase lifted his head, every nerve on alert. Another scrape. Then silence. And then, a soft breath. Warm. Alive. Fur brushed against his leg. Ghost, Chase rasped, voice cracking. The shepherd didn't bark. He began to work quietly at the knots binding Chase's wrists, not panicked chewing, but precise, trained movements. His teeth found the cords and pulled. Chase's mind spun. It can't be him. The last time he'd seen Ghost was overseas, Syria, years ago. A child buried in rubble. Ghost had dug until his paws bled, finding her before anyone else could. He'd been younger then, fierce and tireless. Now his body bore the marks of time, the limp, the scars, but the same fire still burned in his eyes. The first knot gave way. Blood rushed back to Chase's fingers, burning. "You still remember me, don't you?" he whispered. Ghost moved to the other wrist. "Surge," Mason croaked weakly. "Hold on, Mason," Chase murmured. "He's here. Ghost is here." Ray let out a broken laugh. "That mutt? Thought he was a myth." Chase's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Myths don't chew rope like this." Ghost's paw slipped on the cold floor, leaving a small streak of blood. The wound on his hind leg had opened again, probably from forcing his way through the jagged vent above, but he kept working, silent and relentless. Above them, faint footsteps creaked across the floorboards. Ghost froze. The sound faded. The captor was still nearby. He waited. Then, after a long breath, returned to his task. Because rescue wasn't a choice for him, it was instinct. By dawn, the snow had thinned into a mist that hugged the evergreens like breath. Oakridge smelled of damp pine and rusting wood, the kind of air that made sound travel differently, soft but heavy. Inside the sheriff's department, a large table had been cleared for what now looked like a war room. Topographical maps were pinned down by mugs of coffee and smudged notebooks. The eastern ridge, marked in red circles, stretched toward the abandoned lumber compound, the same place Ghost had returned to again and again. Sheriff Leo Haskins stood hunched over the map, marker in hand, reading glasses perched low on his nose. His flannel shirt was half-buttoned beneath his sheriff's coat, and his boots left faint wet prints on the tile. Across the table, Summer Kalen leaned in, her auburn hair tied back, sleeves rolled past her elbows. Her expression was sharp and focused, the freckles along her cheeks tightening with concentration. The vent Ghost used, she said quietly, pointing to a section of the building's foundation, could connect to the old underground supply chutes. Back in the 80s, this place had cold storage for equipment. Those basements weren't sealed properly. Leo grunted. Which would explain how he got in. He tapped the map with his marker. If that's his entry point, we'll need confirmation before sending anyone in blind. Deputy Margot Ellis sat behind a wide monitor, her hoodie sleeves pulled over her palms as she typed. The glow from the screen reflected in her glasses, making her look like she hadn't slept in days. Drone footage is uploading now, she said. We launched it 15 minutes ago from South Ridge. Got preliminary thermal readings. She brought up the heat map. It flickered, a field of orange and blue shadows. At first it's nothing, she said, zooming in, just an icebox. But here, near the basement wall, we've got two faint human signatures, close together. Summer stepped closer. And that? She asked, pointing at a smaller, flickering shape beside them. Margot adjusted the focus. Smaller, moving low to the ground. Consistent rhythmic motion. Leo squinted. That's not wildlife. Summer's voice lowered. That's Ghost. Margot nodded. His limp gives him away. The heat signature matches the footage from last night. Leo's jaw tightened. So he's still down there. And he's not alone. The room went still for a moment, the quiet hum of the heater filling the space. Then Leo spoke again. We move soon. But smart. No sirens. No panic. Summer's gaze lingered on the monitor. Her heart pounded. Something about all this felt too familiar, the setup, the silence, the way everything had gone wrong for these soldiers. Her mind tugged at a memory, a name she'd seen buried in a personnel file years ago. Clay Reaver. She'd found his name while searching through base archives late the night before. Once a security officer at the Timber Ridge training camp, Reaver had been discharged after an altercation with a superior. No charges were filed. But the note in his psychological report had caught her attention, signs of fixation on perceived betrayal. Unstable mood. Depression linked to unresolved trauma. The reason? His son, Joel Reaver, had died in Kandahar during a misidentified strike. Clay had never recovered. He'd vanished into the woods afterward, living alone in a trailer less than a mile from the old lumberyard. Summer printed the report and slid it across the table toward Leo as he returned from the radio. I think you need to see this, she said. Leo scanned the file silently, his thumb rubbing the page edge. After a moment, he exhaled. He's got motive. And the knowledge of that terrain. Exactly, Summer said. And if he blames the military for his son's death, it makes sense he'd target Marines. He's not random. Leo folded the file and set it on the table. Then we go in clean. I want eyes on that basement before anyone breathes too loud. Down in the warehouse basement, Ghost paced quietly along the wall beside Mason. The young Marine lay half-conscious, his leg bound tightly in a strip of insulation Ghost had dragged from the upper floor. Ray flexed one free arm, his other holding a bent piece of metal as an improvised weapon. Chase crouched near them, whispering low instructions. The bulb above flickered. Dust drifted in lazy spirals through the dim air. Ghost froze suddenly, head tilted. Something above creaked, slower this time, more deliberate. Chase's whisper came sharp. He's back. Ray tightened his grip on the pipe. Good. Let him try something. No, Chase warned. We wait. Ghost let out a faint growl, deep and quiet, like a warning carried in his chest. He stepped forward, then backed into the darkness under the stairs, watching the doorway with burning eyes. He knew when to fight. And when to wait. Night descended over Oakridge like a shroud. The forest exhaled in long, cold sighs as the wind slid down the slopes, bending the pines and whispering through the brush. Inside the warehouse, the cold was a living thing. It crawled up through the floor and wrapped around every bone. The basement light swung weakly, shadows swaying in rhythm with the wind outside. Chase Whitmore sat upright now, shoulders hunched but eyes alert. Mason was awake, though pale and sweating. Ray leaned against the wall near the stairwell, holding his piece of rusted pipe like a bat. Ghost crouched low, still as a statue. His breath fogged softly in the air. The wound on his leg had crusted with dirt, but he didn't flinch. His ears twitched, once, twice. Then, he smelled it. Oil. Cigarette smoke. Sweat. And beneath it, grief, old and bitter. The door creaked open, a long metallic groan that echoed off the concrete. A stocky man stepped through the stairwell light. Clay Reaver, late 50s, broad, red-faced from wind and whiskey. His gray-blonde hair was greasy, his jaw covered by a thick beard that hid a deep scar. A frayed military jacket hung from his frame, and a box cutter rested in a pouch on his belt. He carried a dented tray with 3 plates of untouched food. "Thought I'd let you boys starve a bit longer," he rasped. "Make you appreciate dinner." No one spoke. Clay circled them slowly, his flashlight beam sweeping across the concrete. "You Marines," he muttered, his voice slurred but venomous. "Always marching in like you own the place. Always leaving others to clean up your mess." He leaned closer to Chase. "Tell me something, Sergeant. You ever bury your own kid?" "Huh?" Chase stayed still, jaw set. Clay's voice broke. "They said it was an accident. A mistake. Like that helps." Ghost shifted behind the crates, inching forward, body low, breath silent. His amber eyes never left Clay's hand near the belt. Clay turned toward the stairs again, muttering to himself. Then stopped. Something moved. He squinted at the shadows. What the hell? Ghost didn't move. Not yet. His tail flicked once. The muscles along his back tightened. And then Clay stepped closer to the crates. Ghost's lips lifted slightly, not a growl, not yet, just a quiet promise. Meanwhile, at the southern edge of the ridge, beneath the first row of pines, Summer Kalen crouched beside a snow-covered log. She wore her parka zipped to the chin, thick gloves gripping a small packet wrapped in gray cloth, a strip of Chase Whitmore's old field jacket. She'd soaked it in lavender oil and tucked a piece of jerky inside before placing it under the log. Her assistant, Benji Lell, stood behind her, lantern in hand, breath fogging in the frigid air. "You think he'll come again?" Benji asked quietly. Summer nodded. "He's searching for something. Or someone. If there's even a spark of hope left in him, it's because someone gave him a reason to believe he's still needed." Benji smiled faintly. "That's kind of beautiful." "It's survival," Summer said, brushing snow from her knees. "But sometimes those two things are the same." They marked the spot and stepped back into the shadows to wait. The idea was simple: if Ghost passed through again, he'd smell the fabric, recognize the scent, and know he wasn't alone. Back in the basement, Clay paused near the crates, squinting into the dark. The silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Chase's muscles coiled. Ghost's eyes flicked upward once, the signal came and went like a spark. Then he moved. A flash of fur and force slammed into Clay's thigh, teeth clamping down on denim and skin. The man shouted, stumbling sideways, knocking over the tray. Plates crashed. The flashlight spun across the floor. Chase surged up, ripping the box cutter from Clay's belt and driving him backward. Ray lunged next, pinning Clay's shoulder with the broken chair leg. Ghost stood over him, chest heaving, teeth bared but silent. Chase's breath came fast. "We're done being your ghosts," he said through clenched teeth. Clay's eyes flickered, shock, pain, something hollow. He stopped struggling. Then, from above, came the distant growl of an engine, an ATV, cutting through snow. Help was coming. The wind sliced across the ridge in sharp bursts, rattling the pine limbs until they groaned under the strain. The sky hung heavy and blue-gray, pressing low enough to touch the treetops. The air carried the scent of bark, frost, and something electric, tension, waiting to break. Inside the lumber compound, the basement was quiet again. Clay Reaver lay sprawled on the concrete, wrists bound with torn strips of fabric. Blood streaked his cheek, his breath rasped harshly through cracked lips. The box cutter he'd once wielded sat discarded in a dark corner. Sergeant Chase Whitmore and Ray Salter watched him closely, their improvised weapons still in reach. Mason Doyle, pale and sweating, had been propped up against a crate, his wounded leg rewrapped with insulation Ghost had dragged from the stairwell. And there, in front of Mason, Ghost sat alert and motionless, his amber eyes fixed on the ceiling. The deep cut on his hind leg had reopened, leaving a thin trail of red on the cold concrete. He didn't seem to care. His gaze followed the faint hum in the air, a sound too distant for the men to notice. Chase noticed Ghost's stillness. Chase noticed Ghost's stillness. He hears something, he murmured. Ray followed his eyes upward. More trouble. Ghost stood suddenly, pacing to the stairwell. His ears twitched, then flattened. He turned, trotted toward a cracked column at the far end of the room, and sniffed the base. What's he doing? Mason asked, his voice barely a whisper. He's planning, Chase said softly. Ghost lifted his head and barked, once. Then again. Then a third time. Sharp. Evenly spaced. Deliberate. Ray tensed. He's giving us away. No, Chase said quickly. That's a signal, a pattern. 3 barks, pause, repeat. It's a trained call for help. Above them, wind howled through the rafters. But beneath that wind came another sound, faint, mechanical. The distant whir of a drone. On the ridge above, the sheriff's tactical team crouched low, faces dusted with frost, breaths forming clouds in the dark. Sheriff Leo Haskins stood at the front, binoculars pressed to his weathered face. His gloved hands trembled slightly, more from age than nerves, but his eyes were steady. Behind him, Sergeant Ana Molina knelt beside a rugged black case, the department's single working drone feed glowing dimly in the snow light. Ana, in her 40s, had the deliberate calm of someone who'd seen chaos before. Her braids were coiled beneath a wool cap, and her voice came clipped, professional. Audio spike, she said quietly. 3 distinct barks. Same pattern we logged during the last training drill at Timber Ridge. Same dog? Leo asked. Thermal confirms it. Heat signature matches the one from last 3 nights. She pointed to her tablet screen. See that? 3 human figures in the basement, 2 active, 1 weakened. 4th heat source above ground, likely our suspect. Leo lowered the binoculars. We've got our Marines. And maybe. Leo's jaw tightened. We go quiet. I want eyes on the basement before anyone breathes wrong. Behind them, the rest of the team prepped, Officer Nolan Price, the scout, slim and composed, checking the hydraulic cutters and silenced breaching tools. He was in his early 30s, face lean, movements precise. 2 routes, he asked. Leo nodded. Fronts rigged and exposed. We enter from the collapsed storage wing, west side stairwell. Tight, but less visible. Ana studied the thermal feed again. The suspect's pacing upstairs. If he hears us, we lose the element of surprise. Then he won't hear us, Leo replied. Down in the basement, Clay stirred against his bindings. His voice came hoarse but taunting. Smart dog, he rasped. Too smart. Thinks help's coming. Thinks they'll get here in time. Ray took a step forward, gripping his metal pipe. Want to find out? Clay ignored him, eyes flicking toward the dark vent shaft where Ghost had entered earlier. That dog was trained to stay, to signal. He doesn't know when to quit. That's his flaw. That's how I can break him. Chase's jaw clenched. You're done talking. Clay smiled weakly. You'll see. Ghost moved closer to Mason again, positioning himself between the wounded Marine and the stairs. His ears were perked, but his eyes were softer now, steady, reassuring. He wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Outside, the team advanced. Snow muffled every footstep, every whisper. The only sound was the crunch of boots and the faint hum of the drone overhead. At the rear of the formation, Leo gave his final instruction. No floodlights. No noise. I want them alive. Copy that, Nolan said, his gloved hand resting on the cutter's handle. Anna whispered, thermal shows the target still pacing upstairs. Basement group unmoved for 5 minutes. Now's our window. Leo nodded. On my mark. The door gave way with a muted click as the hydraulic tool pressed inward, folding metal like paper. No bang. No echo. Just the faint sigh of cold air rushing through. They slipped inside. In the basement, the silence grew thick enough to taste. The flickering bulb dimmed to a trembling glow. Chase crouched near Mason, tightening his improvised bandage. Ray stood a few feet ahead, body coiled like a spring, the rusted pipe slick in his grip. Ghost's eyes tracked the stairwell, every muscle drawn tight. The scent hit him first, Clay Reaver's mix of oil, smoke, and hate. It was stronger now, closer. Then came the sound, boots slamming against metal steps. The door crashed open. Clay stormed down, wild-eyed, his flashlight beam swinging across the walls. He carried a broken piece of conduit, jagged and rusted, nearly 2 feet long. His words came out raw, half yelled, half snarled. You think you've won? He shouted. You think they'll get here before I finish this? Ghost growled, low and deep, the sound vibrating through the room. Clay pointed the metal toward Chase. You think that mutt's going to save you? And then he lunged. The conduit arced through the air, slicing toward Chase's ribs, but Ghost moved first. A blur of black and tan crashed into Clay's side with the force of a bullet. Teeth locked around his forearm, twisting hard. The conduit clanged against the floor and skittered into the shadows. Clay screamed, falling to one knee. Ray dropped his pipe and tackled him from the side, driving him flat. Stay down. Chase barked, grabbing the man's collar. Ghost held fast, growling deep in his chest until Chase whispered the command, off. The shepherd obeyed instantly, stepping back, chest heaving, blood streaking his muzzle. He moved toward Mason again, tail low, guarding the weak. Clay gasped beneath Ray's weight, his fight gone. Then, from above, came the echo of boots and voices. Oakridge Sheriff's Department. Hands where we can see them. Light flooded the stairwell. Sheriff Leo Haskins descended first, rifle steady, followed by Ana Molina and 2 deputies. Their beams swept the room, pausing when they found Ghost standing tall beside the wounded Marine. That the one? Ana asked softly. Chase, bruised and breathless, nodded. That's him. Leo moved to Clay, nudging him with his boot. We've got him. He turned to Chase. You all right, son? Chase managed a weak grin. Could use a sandwich, and a ride. Behind them, Nolan crouched beside Mason, checking his pulse. He's stable. Needs evac ASAP. Ghost remained still for another moment, eyes darting between each man as if confirming they were safe. Then, finally, he relaxed. His tail flicked once, and he nudged Chase's leg gently before returning to Mason's side. His job wasn't done, not until every one of them was out. Across town, the tactical command van sat idling near the tree lean, its heater humming softly. Inside, Summer Kalen stood frozen before the live monitor. On screen, the helmet cam footage showed Ghost lunging, teeth flashing, muscles taut, saving the men below. Summer's eyes shimmered, her hand covering her mouth as the screen shifted to show him standing guard over the wounded. Next to her, Benji Lel sat still, for once not fidgeting. "He's not just working off instinct," he whispered. "That's training." Summer shook her head. "No," she murmured, tears brimming. "That's loyalty." She turned and stepped outside into the cold. Snowflakes drifted slow and silent. She looked up toward the ridge and whispered, "Come home, Ghost. It's done." By the time dawn crept over Oakridge again, the snow had begun to melt. The town that had spent weeks buried under winter's silence now glistened under pale sunlight. Icicles dripped from rooftops, and the air carried the damp scent of thawing pine and wet earth. It was the kind of morning that whispered of forgiveness, and second chances. Behind the sheriff's station, in a small town park framed by budding pines, folding chairs had been set in neat rows. The crowd was modest, shopkeepers with cracked hands, veterans in decorated hats, families bundled in coats, and a few children holding paper flags that flapped weakly in the breeze. At the front stood Sheriff Leo Haskins, his long brown coat unbuttoned, his hair combed neatly for the first time in months. He held a small box in both hands, the weight of it solemn but proud. When the murmurs died down, Leo began to speak. "Some acts of courage," he said slowly, "don't fit inside any regulation. Some heroes don't wear uniforms, but they don't forget how to serve." He paused, glancing toward Sergeant Chase Whitmore, who stood beside him in his marine dress blues. The bruises along his jaw had faded to shadows, the cut at his temple now a clean pink scar. He still carried himself like a man ready for duty, though his eyes held the kind of calm that only comes from gratitude. And sitting at his heel, chest proud, coat brushed to a silver shine, was Ghost. His collar gleamed in the morning light, the scar on his ear catching just enough sun to look like a mark of honor rather than a wound. The limp was still there, but his eyes were bright, steady, knowing. Leo lifted the box lid, revealing a metal tag engraved with care. "K9 Ranger, Oakridge Sentinel." He handed it to Chase. "For service beyond call or command." Chase knelt in front of Ghost, clipping the tag to his collar. His voice came quiet, almost reverent. "Do you accept the call to serve again?" Ghost blinked once, tilted his head, and barked, clear, strong, echoing off the trees. The crowd erupted in applause. Some clapped, some cried, and a few whispered prayers under their breath. Off to the side, Dr. Summer Kalen watched from beneath a tall pine, her plaid coat wrapped around her shoulders, a faint smile warming her freckled face. She didn't clap. She just watched, proud, tearful, peaceful. In the weeks that followed, Oakridge settled back into its rhythm, but it wasn't quite the same. The story of the shepherd who saved the soldiers spread through the county like wildfire. At Ray's Salter's garage, the walls now carried a framed photo of Ghost beside an old wrench set. Customers who came in for oil changes heard the same line, every time. "Dogs got more discipline than half the recruits I ever worked with," Ray would say with a grin, and everyone who knew the story smiled back. Mason Doyle, still limping on his mending leg, spent his recovery at Summer's clinic. He'd taken to drawing, filling page after page of charcoal sketches. Ghost sitting guard. Ghost sleeping by the fire. Ghost's reflection in the clinic window. He taped them up along the walls for the other patients to see. And Chase Whitmore, the Marine who refused to let his men die alone, split his time between the sheriff's office and a quiet project that began in Summer's backyard. It started as a scribble in a notebook, an idea scrawled beside an old photo of Ghost. They called it Second Leash, a place where dogs who'd been abandoned, abused, or written off as unfit could be retrained for service or companionship. Not to be perfect, but to be useful again. To belong. By the end of March, the storage barn behind the clinic had been scrubbed clean, fenced in, and fitted with simple training structures, balance beams, tunnels, scent courses, climbing ramps. They called it the yard. It wasn't much, but it was hope in motion. Summer ran the program with quiet conviction. She wore her flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows, her copper hair tied back. She treated every dog not as a project, but as a colleague. She taught trust before obedience, and patience before perfection. Ghost became the heart of it all, the symbol. Every Saturday, Chase would drive into town with Ghost riding shotgun, head out the window, tongue out, eyes bright. The moment they pulled up, the kids came running, shouting his name, waving treats, asking to walk beside him. He never barked during training. He didn't need to. His presence steadied every dog, and every person, around him. Some called him Sergeant Ghost. Others, the soldier who came back from the dark. One mild April afternoon, as sunlight melted the last of the snow, a new visitor stood by the fence of Second Leash. She was small and gray-haired, her posture straight despite the cane she leaned on. Her name was Greta Lawson, a retired K-9 trainer from Camp Pendleton. Years ago, she'd lost her own partner, a Belgian Malinois named Rio, after trauma made him too unstable for duty. She'd never worked with dogs again. But that day, as she watched Ghost gently guide a trembling shepherd mix through a tunnel, she whispered to Summer, "Maybe I judged too soon. Maybe some ghosts aren't broken, they're just waiting to be believed in." Summer smiled. "That's exactly why we're here." Greta joined the team that afternoon, bringing her quiet experience to the yard. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't command. She waited, letting the dogs come to her first. Within days, a scarred blue heeler had claimed the spot by her feet. Weeks passed, and spring began to breathe life back into the valley. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the world turned gold, Chase sat on the porch of his small cabin. Ghost lay beside him, head resting on Chase's boot, tail flicking lazily with each breeze. Chase sipped coffee from a dented tin mug and looked out over the darkening tree line. "You saved us," he said quietly. "I don't think I'd be here without you." Ghost lifted his head slightly, one ear twitching. Chase chuckled softly. "I don't know if you came back because you remembered Sarah, or just because it's what you do. But either way, you were never just a stray." He reached down, touched the tag on Ghost's collar, and read the inscription aloud. "Oakridge Sentinel." "Yeah, that fits you." Ghost pressed his head gently against Chase's leg, then curled up again, sighing. His eyes drifted closed, but his ears stayed alert, always listening, always ready. Because for some soldiers, rest isn't surrender. It's just a pause before the next call. Some heroes don't wear medals. They walk quietly beside us, carrying scars we'll never see, driven not by orders, but by loyalty, instinct, and love. Ghost wasn't just a dog. To 3 lost Marines, he was a miracle of flesh and breath, a silent guardian who heard the call no one else could. This story reminds us that even when the world forgets you, even when you've been cast aside, purpose can find you again. Whether you're human or animal, broken or whole, you're never too lost to be found. Because sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them with 4 paws and a heart that refuses to give up. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances, in loyalty, and in the quiet heroes walking among us, share this story. Comment amen if you believe no soul, human or animal, is ever truly forgotten. And remember to subscribe for more stories of courage, hope, and the unseen miracles still waiting in plain sight. May God bless and protect those who watch, wait, and walk the long road home.